Okay, enough of this Are You Afraid of the Dark bullshit, you guys. Anyway, so I was staying at my parents', right? And I heard this noise outside. It was like a scratching noise. Ugh, I didn't know marshmallows went bad. Anyway, I heard this scratching noise, and I go out and look through the glass door, and I just see these two glowing red eyes staring right back at me. And it was so fucking creepy. And I swear, it had to have been a Mothman. You know, it was just kind of like a shadowy gray outline. And it wasn't really that well defined, but those eyes, dude. And they're in the middle of the bumfuck woods in Louisiana, so, I mean, is it really that out of the realm of possibility? Did you guys hear that? Who's out there?
Welcome back to Visited by Voices Live. Really live tonight, unlike earlier when we recorded something very special for you guys that will be premiering on Sunday. We'll get around to that, but in the meantime, let's say hello to my co-host, Sam.
Cheers! Behold, my Bigfoot's moonshine. But this is just Kool-Aid because I'm sober. I just stole it from Chris.
Is this the Kool-Aid you made the other day?
Yeah.
For the show? Excellent.
Yes.
I didn't waste Kool-Aid. I'm happy. Also, I'm joined today by Riley Mitchell, the author of The Essential Paranormal Bucket List and the Paranormal Bucket website, an authority, as it were, online of all things cryptid and supernatural. How are you, sir?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on the show. And if I'd known we were going to have Kool-Aid, I would have made some.
Well, then I would have had to make Kool-Aid as well, but I don't have like branded Kool-Aid. I have like store brand. So that's like sub Jim Jones suicide cult thing. So Riley, the horror genre is what we normally deal with on the show. But I actually grew up loving monster movies in particular. And I also grew up loving the idea that monsters might still be with us, what we broadly would term monsters. Grew up with In Search Of on television. That was kind of my first brush with Bigfoot and conspiracies and ancient aliens. How did you start with all this?
It sounds like a very similar story to yours. I remember growing up, I grew up in Southern California in the 1970s, and I remember we had about 5 channels on the TV, and at least one of them constantly ran old episodes of The Twilight Zone, In Search Of. My family was really into collecting books, and so I had Edgar Allan Poe. I had a bunch of things that really were fascinating to me, and I was an only child. Am an only child, so it made it really easy to occupy myself by reading things around the house and watching shows that were from 20 years before. But that was really my beginning of my interest, and I was really fascinated by the idea that there were things outside of my relatively narrow understanding that might exist or might be possible to discover more about.
So did you from the very beginning know that this would be a substantial portion of your life, or was it just the background noise of childhood at first?
I think it was pretty much, it was definitely something that was of interest to me very early on. I remember going on trips with my family and going to places and looking for the most obscure and kind of unusual information and facts about the place I was visiting and picking up little artifacts when I was there. I remember going on a trip to Northern California in the early 70s and picking up a book that was in a gift shop that was all about Bigfoot, and it looked like it had been cobbled together with old newspaper articles or something, and made in somebody's basement. And it was fascinating to me. I mean, this was something that seemed really official. It was written down, and it was in something that had been published somewhere. And wow, and here I am in this location, and I had never been there before, and it seemed all quite big and mysterious and different. And so the possibilities were kind of endless at that point.
So it doesn't have to be something that's in the book, though it can be. not which one you think is most likely real, which we'll get to that, but which one do you hope the most is real?
That's a great question. I think I would really love it if some of the UFO sightings and things that are discussed in the book and that people write about had some serious documentation associated with them and were real. That would be really fascinating to me. I think that's the one one area that still has so much that we don't know, and that people that investigate that work have still to discover and to release. And I think that's probably the one thing that seems to open up a whole bunch of possibilities, right? Of other worlds and other things that might be out there. I interviewed someone on for my website once who gave a really good answer, and I wish I could steal it right now, and I'll just tell you what it was. He said that he thought I asked him the same question, and he said that he wished that psychic phenomena was real, because he thought that would be something that if people could do that, it would be a great way to solve crimes, find missing children, all that kind of stuff. And I thought that was a great answer.
Yeah, I pretty much want Nessie. So I don't have the best interest of humanity at stake. I just want the plesiosaur. That's pretty much where I'm at. Sam, do you have a favorite cryptid, or?
I married a Bigfoot, so I mean.
Well, that qualifies.
Yeah, he's 6'11", so he's close. He's getting close to that 7 foot to 9 foot range. So he has. I mean, seriously, he has Bigfoot shirts, Bigfoot pajama bottoms. And I don't even think about how tall he is anymore because I'm so used to it, but then I'll see us in pictures and I'm like, Jesus Christ.
How tired is he of putting the star on the top of the Christmas tree?
I don't think it bothers him, honestly. I think it's probably a source of pride at this point. But, I'm just going to put out a PSA. Being tall is really hard, guys. I know short people like to complain too. I am a short person. But it's really hard when you're tall. You can't fit in regular things. You have to get clothes you can't just necessarily go out to Target and find the right pair of pants or shoes. So be nice to tall people, everybody.
As a 5'5" gentleman who's attended too many concerts where someone 6'4" decides to stand directly in front of me, not getting my sympathy. Just not going to happen. But Riley, so the other half of that question, which one do you think is most likely to be real?
I think probably it's hard to imagine that there aren't other life forms on other planets. I mean, that would seem to be hard to. I mean, even the scientific community, I think, takes a pretty strong yes vote on that. So I think that also would fit in with my wish, I guess. I think that would be something that is probably likely. Now whether it's little green men or ETs or whether or aliens that will pop out of your chest or not, I don't know. But certainly, I think that seems likely. The question is, can they fly spaceships to Earth? Can they? Are there things that they can do that we don't know about that they're here already? Those are questions that people are still looking into for sure.
Do you think we'll get confirmation on UFOs from the government at some point within the next year or so? I feel like we're getting real close.
We keep hearing about these reports and they keep releasing information. There was just something, I think the last administration had a mandate to release a bunch of information about research that was done on UFOs. I think the problem is that a lot of the research is, even if it's not about UFOs, a lot of the things that would explain some of the phenomena are probably classified military projects that they still don't want to show or talk about. And so it seems like eventually there's going to have to be something, but there have been plenty of people who have had opportunities to spill the beans on that, and we still don't have any definitive answers.
It just seems wild to me that, more people aren't talking about that. I'll see it pop up in Twitter every now and then, but nobody seems to. If I was the news media, I'd be running with this. That's pretty insane.
Yeah, and it's also one of the few, and I think one of the things I mention in the book and that I'm always surprised by is when you ask people, every year there are these sort of surveys that are done by Gallup and other kinds of official professional survey companies, Nielsen and those kind of places. And they always ask people, do you believe in ghosts, UFOs, different things like that? And it's always surprising to me what percentage of people they ask say that they either believe in different paranormal phenomena or they think it might be possible. It's almost universal that it's about 50%. So no matter what thing you ask somebody about, it's half the people will say they think it's possible that Bigfoot could exist, or a ghost could exist, or a demon could exist, all these things. So it's really, and it's stayed that way pretty much the same for decades.
Yeah, I wonder if that's partially cultural and also just the way people are raised. Growing up, you kind of have those traditions passed down. How do you feel about the UAP versus UFO? I know maybe it's a little bit nitpicky of me, but I would just like to, can we just say UFO instead of UAP? Which is what, unidentified aerial something or other.
I think it's phenomena, right? Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah, I think it's a semantic difference. Yeah, I mean, I think UAP is an effort to get away from the stigma that some people feel UFO has. I think there are plenty of unidentified aerial events that occur that the military talks about all the time, or doesn't talk about all the time, but they don't want there to be necessarily an imprint of any kind of science fiction associated with it. So they've tried to get people to stop using the term UFO. It's not going to work. I mean, people are still going to use that term, but I think that's the distinction. So you can I would say use whatever term you want. I think as long as people know what you're talking about.
Well, and in the 40s and 50s, flying saucer was pretty much exclusively the term used. So, I mean, it does evolve, but the underlying issue is we keep having a word in there that's unidentified or unknown, or I think it's important that although we kind of lie in our elbow grease on the idea of these being crafts, that perhaps that might be a shallow way to look at it. If there's a significantly advanced technology, they're not probably using bolts and staples and nails, right?
Yeah, there's certainly you would think they would have the capabilities of being a little more careful about being viewed than. So it's hard to know, but it's funny. That's one of the few things that I can say I've actually had some experiences with. For a while I was a sales representative in the Midwest, and I would take long drives through Nebraska and Iowa and Missouri and stuff at night. And I remember seeing things at night in the sky that were bizarre. I mean, just in places where there were no lights, there was nothing, no urban area. And I would see things in the sky while I was driving, and I would just say, what was that? And so yeah, I'm a little more willing to sort of say that that's that one area of the paranormal bucket seems like the most likely to have some scientific foundation to it. I mean, that's the definition of paranormal anyway, right? Is that it's stuff that is beyond the understanding of science.
Yeah, especially if there's not an easy way to investigate because there's nothing tangible in your hand to apply any kind of experiment or repeatable experiment to, right?
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong. I mean, humans are inherently curious animals, and folklore, oral tradition, there are all these things. That's the part of all of this that fascinates me the most, I think, is the historical and cultural elements of it. And my definition of paranormal extends to popular culture as well as to the traditional ideas of the phenomenon themselves. So I think that's what makes it interesting, is that people want explanations. They want to know, they want to understand things, and they want to know what stuff that they see in the world, how they can interpret that in ways that make sense to them.
We have some questions coming through the chat, so I'm going to throw just a couple of them up, and then we'll get back to our regularly scheduled conversation. Laundry Art asks, what are your feelings on de-evolution?
Well, I think because evolution is I have to admit I tend to be an advocate for the scientific view of many of these things. So I think evolution can take place. I don't see evolution as necessarily being a progression toward a mastery of a particular skill or of a particular physical trait. So I think mutations and things cause what might be considered de-evolution all the time.
Yeah, I mean, evolution isn't a ladder. It's more like a shrub.
Yeah.
Which is why selection by natural, yeah, I just massacred that. But everyone knows what I'm saying. If you don't have a trait that you need to survive, you don't get to have offspring. It's pretty simple. Or those offspring don't last very long either. So just the strongest or most adapted traits tend to progress. We are who we are as a people today because it's who we needed to be to get here. And it's much like that mud puddle. If that becomes sentient, he can look and say, hey, this hole in the ground is made perfectly for me, not realizing that you were poured into an existing shape. But I think that I think evolution is a fascinating subject because, again, going back to 30s monster movies, they were fascinated and fixated on it as a concept. And I think in pop culture, we're still fascinated by the idea that generations go by and we're not the same exact creature as we were. And that can be as few as like 10 generations, which is not absurd at all. That's within recorded history. There'll be significant physiological changes to what we are. So I think that's just a journey we're taking together. I don't even know that there could ever be anything paranormal about that. I just think that's the human thing, the life thing. And Daniel Shine, Flesh Wound Features, asks, what is your favorite Sasquatch film? Night of the Demon is the correct answer.
Night of the Demon is an excellent one. I have to admit, I like The Legend of Boggy Creek, which is a classic early 70s one. It was one of the first to really deal with this the Bigfoot myth or the Bigfoot phenomena, however you want to look at it, as a serious enterprise, and it was based on a real story that was extrapolated into a little bit more of a Hollywood treatment, but it was still pretty scary. I mean, as a kid, that was a terrifying movie to watch because it was so it was shot in a way that was very interesting too at the time. So that's a favorite. But there are some that I don't like, but I think the ones that were mentioned are great.
Okay, what are those movies? Because I'm going to go watch them.
You can't do that. You got to tell us.
I'm sorry. Well, I mean, I'm not a big Harry and the Hendersons fan.
Damn, that's mine. No, I don't watch a lot of Sasquatch movie or Bigfoot movies. So no, I am. No, I do want to know your thoughts on least favorite ones. Harry and the Hendersons, I can understand for sure. Because they're really playing that. It's just straight up comedy.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun. I don't want to overplay my hand on that. It's not meant to be a serious film. And there's this stuff tends to be very interestingly visual. I mean, these cryptids, Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, all those tend to these unseen animals, these hidden animals, as they're called, cryptids, tend to be very visual. So they lend themselves to telling some great stories.
Have you seen the Sasquatch series on Hulu yet?
I have seen I think one of the episodes of it. I haven't seen them all. It's interesting. I have to admit, I tend to be a little bit overwhelmed by the number of ghost hunting and Sasquatch hunting and all these different shows that are on cable. I watch them with a lot of interest for the dramatic elements of them. I don't expect there to be the discovery, the amazing conclusion at the end where something pops up and someone says, "Oh, look, proof that this exists." So, but over time, you start to get worn down after you see the 500th episode of some ghost hunter show.
Oh yeah, I just pieced out on all those ghost hunting shows. I'd rather go out and, I think it would be more fun to actually experience that for myself anyway. I think you're fine waiting on the Sasquatch show. Don't rush. It's It's not as cryptidy as you would probably like, without spoiling anything. So I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, you're good. Trust
Yeah,
me.
I think the people, you know, the characters, just like with many of these stories, sometimes the characters who are doing the hunting are the most interesting. You know, they're the real celebrities of these shows. You know, the monster or the cryptid is just the hook.
Yeah, I felt like they really wanted that Tiger King press, but it's impossible. You can't do another Tiger King. You won't be able to. That show was wild.
Cryptids sort of are the ultimate MacGuffin in that you know, they provide something to search for. A great narrative immediately emerges, and the drama is just kind of baked into looking for them, because it's always easy to have that element of danger attached. You know, to my mind, you could read the Blair Witch Project as a cryptid film very easily, because that basically is a bunch of people going into the woods looking for a Bigfoot. You know, it's really interchangeable at a certain point. So I think there is something really dramatic about those shows and what they present. But ultimately, I always have it in the back of my mind that if they found something real and substantive, we would have gotten it on the news way before it aired.
Right.
So that's the big problem.
That's the fun, right? That's the people create narratives based on that's the fun part of doing this kind of analysis or looking into the past and collecting these events and these wonderful kind of stories, is that it provides a real window into the historical time in which some of these stories come out, or even more recent times. You know, it tells you a lot about what people were thinking about in the larger popular culture.
And you know, you just perfectly summarized what I constantly am telling people works about horror. Whether it's a novel or a movie or this, there is really something being said about people's core fears and understanding of the world at any given time. It's interesting that all the darker emotions tell you a lot more truths than the more happily presented positive emotions. I wanted to ask, though, about John Keel. When I was growing up, he was the paranormal guy. I mean, if you were a reader and you didn't follow him, there was probably something wrong. Pioneer, crackpot, probably. But I can't imagine we would have gotten nearly anything we've gotten without him. So what were your feelings? Did you read a lot of John Keel growing up?
I certainly read the Mothman Prophecy. I think, you know, he was a really good writer, and I read some of his other shorter articles and things as well. I think he had his ability to bring in historical narrative and interview, and also sprinkle in a little bit of artistic license where it was appropriate, was really a critical part of his skill set. And so, yeah, he certainly provided a lot of fuel to, particularly the Mothman, as your opener referenced, the Mothman controversy, the Mothman issue, or the stories. But yeah, he was a great pioneer for sure.
And how much traveling have you done to support your exploration of all these subjects? I mean, have you been to Point Pleasant? Do you spend all your vacations searching out locations?
I try to, when I go places, I try to find something there that will interest me in this area. I haven't been to Point Pleasant, unfortunately. I've wanted to go. I think I've driven through there. The problem is that the time to go there is during the Mothman Festival in September every year. And so I have never been in that vicinity during that time of the year. And so but to answer your more general question, yeah, I tend to have done a lot of travel. There are places that I still want to go, like Point Pleasant for sure. I'd like to go to Easter Island still. There, you know, that's a little bit more far flung than I've been able to get, but I've had some really great experiences in the catacombs of Paris and different cemeteries, and just kind of soaking up some of the exciting kind of native culture and folklore from those areas.
Yeah, as far as Easter Island goes, I've always had a weird fascination with that, even as a kid, because it was just these big heads. What was your reaction when they actually dug beneath them?
Well, I think that the most interesting part of all that is how did they move those things, right? That because the quarry where those heads were cut is quite some distance from where they have been set, and so there's a lot of speculation, and it's only enhanced by the fact that the folks who lived on Easter Island during the pre-colonial period were all killed in plagues, and so there really wasn't a record kept of any of that stuff. So yeah, when they dug in and found that the heads were connected to bodies, or at least some subset of a body underneath, that was really amazing.
Yeah, that was probably one of the coolest things that I've seen as far as archaeology goes lately. I really kind of wish they'd stop trying to open tombs in Egypt. Just don't let out a curse, please. That's all I'm asking.
There's always room for a few more locusts. You don't like?
Had this discussion.
It
Not a bug person.
Depends on the bug.
Yeah, Mothman, that's fine. I like moths and I like men.
I don't know how to respond to any of that.
I don't either.
So when you were putting the book together, its breadth is, I think, pretty amazing, because it's not just what you think. It's not just a catalog of maybe existing monsters, right? There's also things that are a lot more, I'd say, commonplace, but still kind of fit into the mold. Murder houses that have ghost stories attached to them, but that we know that the actual crime's committed. That's a side of the paranormal bucket that I think is endlessly expandable. Is that kind of like crime tourism, or however you want to put that, if that's distasteful? Is that something that you see yourself going further into, or is it more the Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, Abominable Snowman type thing? Is that more where your focus will be?
Well, I think I think there is a real interest in the sort of true crime element of stuff these days. I think certainly my kids are fascinated by that element. I mean, they're a little bit less fascinated by some of the traditional monsters, but they are really interested in some of the stories, because I think it seems more immediate to them. And I think there is something to be said for that. I mean, I just came back from a trip to Seattle. It's my first trip since 2019. And I went by Ted Bundy's childhood home just to see what it was like. I just wanted to take a look at it. And so even I, fall into that, into that a little bit, but I'm actually even more interested in some of the older stuff. So most of my research during the pandemic has been looking at 19th century spiritism and in Europe and America, and sort of doing research with some of the newspapers that were published by those societies and groups during that period up through the 1930s or so.
Yeah, I was really surprised to learn that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was a big spiritualist.
Yeah, and he had huge fights with, there are all these interesting celebrities. He had huge fights with Houdini, right? And there were a lot of other. I think even Charles Dickens was involved early on with these groups. So yeah, there's these things are all fascinatingly connected, and the stories even going back to Mary Shelley in the early part of the 19th century, and understanding a little bit more about some of the things that some of these classic stories are getting at really fascinates me too. So I guess my answer is that I'm interested in a lot of things. That I'm sort of an expert in none, but interested in many things, and so I try to keep track of ones that might provide some interesting storytelling for me.
Very cool. I would probably recommend. I actually have a book on spiritualism right now, and it does have a lot of history in it by Raymond Buckland, and I can't think of the name off the top of my head. But if that's if that's in your wheelhouse, I'd give that a shot too. He's pretty thorough with his stuff.
Yeah, I think I'll definitely check that one out. I've been really fascinated in particular recently with the columns in these old newspapers in Boston and San Francisco in particular, in Chicago, where they did kind of a Dear Abby with spirits kind of thing, where they would have a medium who would ask spirits questions like, what do you think about the president's decision to do this or that, or what do you think about random thoughts about things? And it was kind of like it was like a weird talk show that they would host, and it would just go on for weeks and weeks, where they would just do these weird interviews with these spirits in the newspapers.
Very cool. Yeah. I would say, as far as, I think probably the closest thing that we have to a spiritualist these days is John Edwards.
That's a pretty bad indictment of our times, I think.
Well, look, I'm not gonna get into that argument. I'm gonna just say not a fan, just because I'm just can't, doesn't, something in my gut. That's all.
I'm still trying to answer why people still believe in some of these things. I mean, not as a criticism, but just why you think in today's society with the internet and with all the social media and the ubiquitous cameras that are everywhere, you think people would start losing that sense of mystery and it's not happening. And I wonder, I've sort of thought a lot about that as well, trying to figure out, what is the secret sauce that continues to have this stuff be, 50% of the population believing that certain phenomena are real. And even though you think that there were fewer and fewer opportunities for things to surprise people today.
You can't prove a negative,
That's true.
You can't disprove it either. And also, especially in America, we have a tradition of relying on faith in the public square as a concept. And I mean, when from a young age, you're told to believe in things that you cannot prove, it does open some doors that maybe in a society that doesn't have that kind of history, you wouldn't see. But that actually leads nicely to what I wanted to ask next, which is like, is there anything out there that you just consider too far crazy? Like, is the Flatwoods Monster just too far out there for you, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little skeptical of. I'm pretty skeptical of demonology. There's just a part of me that I think maybe it's because if I take the logical conclusion of believing in demons, then I have to believe in all sorts of other things with religious connotations that I'm not necessarily prepared to believe in. So that seems to be hard to imagine. I mean, there are some legends that seem hard to explain why anyone would believe them. There are strange things about reincarnation, for example, which I know is a hot button topic. There are many religions that believe strongly in reincarnation, but we still have very little ability to evaluate. As you said, you can't prove a negative. It's very hard to have evidence for those kinds of things. But I think the Bigfoots, the Loch Ness monsters, the Mothmans, some of these things have staying power because they have a backstory. And it's those one-off things that you hear about, the mystery kangaroo that's sighted somewhere in the Midwest that no one knows why it's there. Or there's another thing that people see all the time, which is surprising to me, is the tigers. Sort of a tiger will appear and disappear in a location, and it's not necessarily a monster, but it's an animal that shouldn't be there. And is that a cryptid, or is that just an escaped animal from the zoo, or what? So I think it's healthy to be interested, but it's also healthy to be somewhat to want to find out more information.
That's a really good definition. They're a rhetorical question about a cryptid in general. And that I was thinking about this earlier. Cryptid would usually have a corporeal state, for the most part. Would you agree with that, or do you kind of include ghosts in there too, or other dimensional beings?
Well, I think cryptids are specifically animals, so they're hidden animals. And what's interesting and what supports a lot of people who are real cryptozoologists is that science finds animals that they didn't know existed all the time. There just aren't as many. I think everyone wants to find a living dinosaur, the sort of Jurassic Park approach to to looking at the cryptid world. But I mean, there are species of fish and things that people discover that no one knew about, or at least maybe the local people knew about, but that Western science didn't know about. And so, there are times in the history particularly in the 20th century, where there were major discoveries of animals that people thought were extinct, and that those would have been considered cryptids. That the coelacanth, the sort of prehistoric fish, is a boring but good example of a fish that people thought had been extinct for 60 million years until they found one, and that would have been considered a cryptid.
That's a really good point. One of the reasons I'm thinking about it is because when I was going through the paranormal bucket list, one of the things on there was well, sorry, I'm low. It's been a long day. I believe it was having a vision quest, and it didn't mention anything specifically about ayahuasca or DMT, but I know that some people have had experiences on DMT and seeing machine elves, which are kind of like other dimensional beings. And that's why I was thinking maybe not a cryptid, maybe just a biological function of our brain, sort of how there's that the same effect that a lot of people have when they get sleep paralysis and they see shadow people and they feel like they're being choked. So also shadow people, maybe not cryptids, because also not animals.
Yeah, so, I think those would probably be considered spirits. But yeah, it's funny you pick one of the things in my book that my publisher was, I think, somewhat uncomfortable with, because it's you don't want to give people too many ideas about the sort of things they should do, for legal liability reasons. So
I can understand that. Yeah, no, that's actually been on my bucket list for a long time. If I can find a place to legally go and trip DMT, I will. I want to see those fucking machine elves.
There's a question of the internal mathematics of how we map to reality, right? Like, so our brains understand there's some sort of equation to make sense of things, but it doesn't have enough of the numerals or with their place in the equation. So we start just filling in things with hypotheticals. And I think like near-death experiences and machine elves, and especially that sort of thing, becomes kind of the answers to the questions we don't really have the questions for yet. And I think it's very universal, because there's only so many answers you're going to come up with. So if you want to believe that you were in a controlled state, at some point you end up with lizard people,
Are you saying there aren't lizard people?
I'm saying there probably aren't lizard people. People just watched V in the 80s and really liked it.
I mean, Alex Jones tells me there are lizard people all the time.
Does he call you up personally to tell you this?
Sometimes.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, there's an interesting cryptid story about lizard people too. There's as you probably have heard about the chupacabra, which is a relatively recent cryptid that's appeared on the scene, probably dating essentially to the 1990s. And what's interesting about it is that it sort of took on a backstory of ancient Genesis, but in reality, the beginning of that particular cryptid's story really is relatively recent. And there was a researcher that tried to get to the bottom of, because the information is relatively new and people were able to dig deep into that story and find out where the first sightings of that particular cryptid were. They were able to trace that to a town in Puerto Rico, where the first person who reported, or one of the first people who reported seeing a chupacabra, which is like this strange half dog, half lizard, vampiric creature that drinks the blood of animals and causes all sorts of chaos, was discovered. And it turned out, as an interesting aside, that the person who first reported, or one of the first people, had watched the movie Species from that early part of the 90s, right before they saw this, the chupacabra. And so there was a lot of effort made to try and connect the character in the movie Species with the chupacabra sightings.
That is wild. I didn't know that. And I've been a fan of the chupacabras since, I was a kid in the 90s, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever, because like this was something that was, it was relatively close to Texas. We've had our own chupacabra sightings down here. I think the most recent one was probably in Elmendorf, but it was just like a dog with mange, like really bad mange. It's always disappointing when that happens. I'm really holding out for the chupacabra.
Well, the stuff blows up, and that's what's so interesting. The Bigfoot and and Loch Ness Monster and some of the other stories, even the Mothman has a backstory that goes back a couple hundred years. And so I think that all seems relatively hard to prove or disprove or even investigate too much to get to a higher level of authenticity, right? But and also just another thing I recently was noticing is that I saw a poll or some research that indicated that 70% of Americans are born, grow up, live, and die within a very small distance from in geographically. So, even we think of 200 years ago, people would pretty much stay where they were born, and they would live in the town that they were from, and they would be happy, and that would be their lives. And it's still a huge percentage of people today that don't have as much experience with things that are kind of unusual and foreign to them. And so that tends to increase people's willingness, even in a media age like we're in today, willingness to believe that strange things may live just over the hill.
Yeah, you kind of always want to think about, there's something more out there, rather than, and not without having to leave the comfort of your town. I am that person. I never leave my house unless I have to. But I'll sit here and think about things all day long.
We see that with language all the time. Whereas there's local lingo that changes the meanings of words so substantially within a region that how people think about concepts that are reliant on that word changes. A simple example, a very surface level example, is that some places of the country, people will say, do you want a soda? Other places it's, do you want a pop? But what's interesting is not so much just as there's variations in language, it's how the culture is set up to deliver that product actually changes. Because up in certain sections where pop is considered much more of a childish or a candy-ish thing, whereas it was developed originally as a pharmaceutical, and you still have some of that tradition exist in the Northeast with brands like Moxie, which tastes like cough syrup for a reason, because pretty much that's what it was developed to be. But people actually think of real tangible things differently because of the language they use, and I think that in different areas where they have been grown accustomed to believing in certain ideas, whether it's a cryptid or a spiritual foundation or anything like that, I think we talk past each other, and that stops us from being able to investigate as well. Because, for instance, if you're talking about the jinn, right? In the West, we think genies, we think Robin Williams. So right away, we can't even approach the Islamic tradition of the jinn. We can't. We can't even approach it. So that investigation gets kind of lost. Do you find cultural differences to be to obscure what might be natural phenomenon or exaggerate even questionably supernatural?
Well, I think people look for answers to questions that they have based on their cultural backgrounds, right? And so, some cultures have really rich and deep oral traditions or written traditions that connect them to the past in ways that give them a sense of belonging. It forms a community over long periods of time. And so even I think stories about the cryptids or about ghosts or these things, there's a direct connection to ancestors and to the past and to childhood and to all sorts of things. It's kind of like when you're a kid and you memorize all the names of the states, right? And that somehow that provides a touchstone to some weird past where it was important to know the capital of Wisconsin. But everyone learned it, so everybody in your town has that same experience. But I think different cultures certainly have different approaches to learning about the unknown and learning about unfamiliar stuff. But I think universally people are curious and people want they want an answer, even if the answer is just it's unknowable. That that is an answer to some people that you're just not going to know it. So take our word for it. This is something that you should just not ask questions about because you'll never know the answer.
Laundry has another question. Feelings on skinwalkers and their associated hunting grounds.
Skinwalkers are, for those folks who aren't as familiar with skinwalkers are, I think, mostly a Navajo, certainly Pueblo Indian traditional creature, monster, threat that are still cited and used as a way, particularly way to encourage, as many monsters are and have been for hundreds of years, used as a way to teach lessons to the younger generations and to reinforce taboos and things that people shouldn't do. And so I think the skinwalker has evolved from just a monster to, I think, include some modern threats to traditional native cultures. I think people see skinwalkers as not just demons in human form, but they see them as economic threats, or they see them as the guy from the power company who wants to mine coal in your backyard on the reservation, that kind of stuff. But that stuff is those things are really alive. Those traditions are really alive, particularly out here in the Southwest.
And we definitely see that in pop culture continue as a tradition, because remember, pop culture is just the new version of folklore, really. But you see that in the same way that skinwalkers have evolved to be kind of a fear of the outside world almost, and a cautionary story for children. The way that Krampus was also to provide guidelines for a punishment and reward system for children. You see that in modern culture, your Michael Myerses of the world and your slashers are providing a social framework for what is expected of especially young women, right? That's the entire like sex equal death / final girl trope is based on that. So in a way, I wonder if in 100 years, your Michael Myerses and your Jason Voorhees will be the new cryptids of our era. At one point, because remember, there was a point where flying saucers were popularized and got cited a lot more often, specifically flying saucers after When the Worlds Collide came out. There was a huge increase in sightings. So you have to ask the question, does the culture lead the experiences, or do the experiences lead the culture? And that's an open question.
Well, I think the biggest threats too are the ones that seem kind of possible. It's easy for me to watch an old movie from the 50s of them with giant ants, or the giant shrew or something, and not take that seriously. But when I watch a movie like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the original one, or even the one from the late 70s, those movies are still they're still powerful to me, because they have an element that seems vaguely threatening in ways that aren't easy to dismiss. I mean, it's not something that you can say, well, it's hard to imagine there'd be a giant ant that would be attacking my family, but it's conceivable that you could have, I mean, gosh, we have plagues all the time. It's conceivable there could be an alien plague that causes people to lose their personality and their humanity.
Yeah.
So,
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Please.
No, that's fine. I'm just ruminating.
Oh, I mean, I think it's definitely an evergreen fear about, losing yourself basically too. And I think that's partially why they still resonate for sure. I wanted to kind of bounce off of Lauren's point. Lauren, you were saying about how the ideas form the culture or vice versa, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, that's spinning off from that. I wonder if the idea, like the concept of tulpas or thought forms, since our brains act more like receivers than anything, where are these thoughts kind of coming from out of the ether? Since, for a while we had so much zombie media to consume, and then everybody was talking about zombie apocalypse. And for me, because I'm weird about these things, I was like, guys, stop talking about it, okay? You're going to make it happen.
Well, have you looked out the window recently?
Huh?
Have you looked out the window recently?
I know it's raining.
Well, no, I'm saying we just went through a year of basically the zombie apocalypse.
Yeah, but not like the zombie apocalypse I wanted. Just the one it was like, meh.
Wow.
It was just
The Rolling Stones had a song about that.
Not a very good one. It's not a very good apocalypse. I'm just saying, it's too slow.
Well, I wonder though, like you talk about tulpas. Actually, I was about to bring them up, so that's kind of creepy. But
see, psychic abilities right there.
Because I think, like, if you look at the 50s and the body snatcher concept, right? I think that has evolved, and the current form that is taking is more like tulpas and doppelgangers. And I think it's very, very specific because as we've gotten to be more of a self-centered society, we create social networks so we can see ourselves on screen, right? Well, a tulpa or a doppelganger is basically our reflections. So as we see this increase in popularity of these creatures, these monsters, these projections, it's interesting because it does reflect the society, or maybe there's legitimate experiences that are being dramatized. I tend to think the first is true, but I do think that the study of all these things is important. I think that Nessie is a great example of a more innocent time when it was easier to believe that there could be a giant sea serpent in your lake, right? There's something wonderful about that probably is unworkable today, except for nostalgia's sake. Now we're looking for like, well, maybe there's really a giant eel that's just a natural creature in the lake, right? That's where we're kind of at now. But that's not where they were at in the 1940s or the 1910s or, St. Columbus's day at all.
Well, it becomes a stamp of approval. It becomes a badge of honor, right? To have a lake monster, and every big body of water, fresh body of water in North America has had at least one sighting of a lake monster here or there. Lake monsters are generally the least frightening of all the cryptids because there are no stories really of them attacking people. And that's one of the things about cryptids by and large is that they're not cuddly, but they're also they're not going to harm you. It's not a Mike Myers situation where you're sure, where you might, half your family might not live past the campground. And so that's the other thing about cryptids is that by and large, they're pretty benign.
Well, again, those who hunt after monsters definitely would seem completely insane if there was like a body count and they were still doing it, right? So if you're going into the woods with a backpack and a flashlight and you really think there's something that's going to tear your arms off, you better hope it's a peaceful animal that you're just trying to protect by proving its existence.
Yeah, but that's why it doesn't, those particular, I find them interesting from the standpoint of sort of a folklore standpoint, but I mean that they don't scare me. It's not, I as a kid I could be very easily scared, and I was more scared by Jaws than I was scared by some of the cryptid stories because they didn't seem malevolent enough. It wasn't something where I felt like if I was hiking in the woods and I came across Bigfoot that I was going to possibly not exit the woods, so there wasn't the immediacy, the need to protect myself that I felt with some of the other potential hazards.
Yeah, he's just walking around the woods. He's not bothering anybody. He probably doesn't want to kill you. But I would really hate to pick up after that. Seriously. Like, I know you're supposed to take a little doggy bag with you when, you walk your dog, but I think you'd need a hefty for it.
Yeah, there are some people that collect that scat. And they're
really.
Yeah, there is. It's an interesting. I don't. One of the really interesting cryptid related sites to check out is the International Cryptozoology Museum, which is in Maine, and they have exhibits of things like that there, and it's really a fascinating. They have conferences there. They have all sorts of really interesting collections, records, all sorts of things there that are worth checking out if anyone finds themselves in New England.
Lauren Coleman and I had an exchange a while back because somehow we ended up on the same thread, and people who were referring to each of us differently, and it was a big nightmare. So he has a great sense of humor about everything, though. He's a gentle person. Definitely.
He's a great guy. He's a very impressive author. He's written a lot of really interesting books. I love his book Mysterious America, which is one that I would recommend. It's kind of a classic of particularly of North American cryptid history. So if you haven't checked that one out, it's worth taking a look at it.
And just to be clear, Laundry, Champ, I actually have spent some time on Lake Champlain. All I can say there is there's definitely sunfish galore in that lake that will bite on anything you throw in the water. So, I mean, if there is a monster in that lake, it's not hurting for food at all. If you have any final questions, let's get them in the chat. So I wanted to just take a moment and tell you that, like, I really did enjoy the hell out of this book, and I'm continuing to enjoy it because it is a book that you can reread the same chapters over and over, because it's light reading, but it's also smart. Everything is presented in a positive light, and it's all very encouraging to the reader to get further into the subjects. Did you ever consider like expanding one of these chapters into a full-fledged book?
I'd love to, but I know how hard writing a book is now, and that's scared me a little bit. It's actually one of the most challenging things about this project was doing the research for years and years and years and trying to condense it down into just a single page. I mean, it would have been very easy to write a whole book about the Winchester Mystery House in California, or the catacombs in Paris, or any of those things. And people have done those things too. So I think there are elements of that sort of the top 100 sites approach to things, which would lend themselves to some larger projects. I also was interested and am interested in expanding the definition of some of those paranormal things. So, including books to read, including some activities and things that maybe they aren't just the most obvious things. And some of them are frankly next to impossible to do, like going to Siberia and visiting sites there and stuff. But I think when you do a bucket list, right, if you do all the things on your bucket list, that's not a good sign, because that means you probably don't have much time left. So.
It's funny because I'm really enjoying the book too. And what I like about it is I think people are not going to realize that they've already accomplished some of the things on this bucket list. Even if, it seems like, paranormal bucket list, that sounds like it would be daunting. No, because it's like, yes, I mean, we've got astrology in there, done that. Got crystals, yep, done that. I'm just like ticking off boxes. It's great. This is not only like a bucket list. It's you've also got tarot in there as well. It's a way to kind of have, say, your layman just discover new things and fall down their own rabbit holes. And that's in addition to it being a really cool travel guide, because I'm legit, there are a ton of places like the Voodoo Museum in New Orleans that I've wanted to go, and then finding out all these other places in Louisiana as well. So it's sort of like, okay, well, if I'm going to go to New Orleans for this, I'm going to hit all these other things too. So it's really enjoyable. And yeah, I would, hey, I'm totally on board if you want to write a follow-up to that, man. I would buy that in a heartbeat. Well,
thanks. No, that's very kind. And there's that is also a challenge too, right? Is there's so many possible places to include. And there's a part of me that would like to include some of the really obscure things, but you also want to be, you don't want to assume too much about the audience, right? I mean, for every person that's on this particular show who knows a lot more about this stuff, there are plenty of people who are interested but don't know even where to begin to sort of indulge their interest in some of these topics. So you have to kind of make that balance. But it would be fun. I wonder if my publisher would take a sequel. That I'll have to talk to them about that. Do it.
So I do want to point out, if you want a copy of the book, riograndebooks.com. It's a full color book, which is not a cheap process normally, but the book's cover price is $15.95, so it's extremely affordable. I think with shipping, I paid $21, which is for a book that's this handsome and this well illustrated. Every chapter includes illustrations. is a great deal. It's an amazing deal. And I don't know about you, but I mean, I think all the copies out there are still signed, right?
I signed a whole bunch of them. I think you did something that a lot of folks don't do, which is you went directly to the publisher. I think the publisher can provide signed copies to people for sure. But the book is available at all your favorite or least favorite traditional bookstores and vendors out there too. So it was really fun to do it, and I was missing the last year of not being able to go out and sort of go to libraries and go to places and look at stuff. So I'm hoping to get back to doing that in the near future.
And who knows? When we all grow those extra arms from these vaccines, you can absolutely have more to write about.
If that was a side effect, I would be already vaccinated.
I'm halfway there.
It's create a cryptid. That's right.
That's okay. Okay. Again, evolution isn't a ladder. We're fine. I want to really, Riley, I really want to thank you for coming on today. I actually want to do more on this kind of a subject as well. I love horror. It's always my thing, but I think monsters are my bigger thing, to be honest. I don't think I would have fallen in love with horror without the monsters, whether they're real or imaginary or invented by a pen. I really love this subject. I'd love to do more. If you do write that sequel, I want you back on the show. We'll have more talk.
That sounds great. Anytime. Thanks so much for having me. And keep everyone keep being being curious. That's the main thing.
Absolutely. For this channel, we will be back 2 conjoined days next week. On Tuesday the 4th, we have Austin Rogers coming on to talk about creature design and a whole lot of other issues. It's going to be a conversation that goes where it goes, much like water falling down a waterfall. We don't know where else it's going to land, but it's going to be messy and wet. And then on Wednesday the 5th, which is Cinco de Mayo, we're joined by Greg Lambertson, the director of Slime City and Slime City Massacre, and Johnny Gruesome, great B movie maker who's created a lot of really fun films that probably don't deserve a wider audience because they're not going to appeal to people besides us, but I would love to subject everyone to them. That would be a wonderful thing to do. And we're announcing on the show that you might have seen a thumbnail go up earlier today, but on Sunday, a recorded episode will go up at 8 p.m., which is Sam and I's discussion of Zombie Ready with its director, Prasanth Varma. And that was a lot of fun to record. We had to kind of coordinate 10.5 hours versus our time and do it in the middle of the night and move hell and high water just to be able to do it. It's a lot of fun. It's a great episode. And I think you guys will enjoy it, even if you haven't seen the film yet. But do yourself a favor. Zombie Ready is one of the best in many, many years. Definitely check it out. So I want to thank everyone out there in the chat and everyone watching that did not speak up. We will see you very soon. Have a great night.
Bye.
Where's the outro?